I didn't get into medical school
Right.
in multiple stages. So as an undergrad, as a postgrad, etc. And instead of medicine, I ended up doing biomedical sciences,
Right.
which this was really a technical thing again. It wasn't intentional. But at the time, and I think it's still the case, in your UCAS form, you can't put all the choices medicine in case you don't get into medical school. And
Right.
that would mean not going to university that year. And biomed is, I think, still a very common backup option for
Right.
people who want to go into medicine, because if you have a biomedical sciences degree for 3 years, you can then fast track into medical school, do the postgrad degree where it's 4 instead of 5 years. This is going to be controversial,
Right.
but for the purpose of treating untreatable, or at least so far untreatable, genetic disease.
Right. Assalamu alaikum, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Tarikhology podcast. I'm your host, Abdul Wahid. Today, we have a very special episode with a very special guest. Our guest has a PhD in cell biology and is an associate editor at Nature Cell Biology. Our guest is also an advocate for more women to work in STEM subjects and has been on TEDx giving a TED talk. Her name is Sabrya Carim. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Alaikum salam, brother.
How are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Super excited to be on your podcast. Jazakallah khair for having me.
And we're super happy to have you on our podcast as
Thank
well.
you.
How was the travel here?
Very fine, very fine. It's very simple to get here. It's just getting onto the Northern Line and coming out at Old Street. But if you're very bad with maps, then you might go around stations a few times. But it was very good.
Yeah, definitely. You know, some of us in our crew have had major issues getting here. I can attest to that. You know, me personally, you know, there's a lot of estates around here,
Yeah.
if you know the area, and they can be a bit intimidating, I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie. But Google Maps doesn't help you, but if you've been here once, you'll be here again.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure you're no stranger to the limelight. So I'll start off the podcast by asking you a few questions about your life, experiences, and whatever advice you can give to the audience. And I'm ready when you are.
Okay, let's
Yeah.
do this.
Let's do this.
Bismillah.
So tell us a bit about yourself. Where were you born? How were you raised?
So I was born here in the UK, in London, but I'm originally Mauritian. So my heritage is Mauritius, really 100%. So both my parents are from Mauritius. And for the audience, I think Mauritius is pretty well known, but it's a small island in the Indian Ocean, super tiny, very popularly known as a honeymoon destination
Right.
with its beautiful beaches, sun, sand, and sea. So I was born here in London, grew up, spent the first 5 years of life here, and then my parents moved us all back to Mauritius.
Right.
And really, I was brought up in Mauritius because I spent the rest of my childhood and early adulthood in Mauritius, and then moved back to the UK and the West, let's say, for university and then my career journey.
Was it a bit of a culture shock coming from Mauritius back to the UK?
It's an interesting question because during that time that I was in Mauritius, so between the ages of 5 and 19, we were going back and forth quite a lot. So from Mauritius to the UK.
Right.
And so we were still in touch with England, even if it's different when you live somewhere
Right.
versus coming in on holiday. So I felt okay with the culture shock, or at least at the time, maybe was completely oblivious to it. But the culture shock sort of became apparent when I joined university.
Right.
And that was where, the identity issues came.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Mauritius is a majority Muslim country, a Muslim nation, right?
No.
Is it not?
No.
Because I'm sure is it not halal? Is there not like halal stuff available there?
There is.
Yeah.
So Mauritius is very interesting in its demographic. It
Right.
isn't a Muslim majority country. And I
Right.
get asked this a lot. So I think it is maybe something that isn't well known. Technically, it's not. So it's 18% or a bit less than 18% of Muslims
Right.
from the whole population. Just over 50% Hindus.
Right.
And the rest is distributed between Christians, people of Chinese descent, very small portion of Arabs, very small portion of people of white descent. So this would have been ancestrally from when Mauritius was a colony.
Right.
But it's a very diverse population of people. And because it's so diverse, and it has always been the case since the island was discovered and colonized,
Right.
people live together in harmony, even if the majorities are different, the population proportions are different.
Right.
So there will be mosques, you're right, there will be halal food pretty much readily available everywhere. But it's not a Muslim majority
Right.
country. Eid and both Eids would be public holidays in Mauritius. But yeah, it isn't a Muslim majority country.
Is it like the UK where sometimes the communities are a bit segregated from one another? They have like a Chinatown, for example, like a little Muslim town or whatever,
Yeah.
or little Bangladesh, you would, is it anything like that, or is just everyone just sharing a community with one another?
Everyone shares a community. It really is a side by side living with your neighbor. You might be in a community that is, people are concentrated in certain pockets, but I think it's more of a by happening rather than you will go and live in that area if you are Muslim, or if you are of Bangladeshi descent, or if you are Christian, you will live in this area. It's just very normal to have your neighbor not be somebody that might be of the same community as you. And I think, again, it's for historical reasons. Mauritians have always been so diverse a population. So we do have a Chinatown in Port Louis, which is the capital city, and incidentally where I'm from. But I think it's more historical, again, probably because at the time there was a majority of people of Chinese descent living in that area, and so it sort of became that town, and historically was preserved that way, so you would know where to go if you wanted to have certain types of foods. But otherwise, people are living together side by side. And I think for a long time, looking into history, Mauritius has been an example of diversity and pluralism and tolerance for the world, and that is very true.
Before we talk about your educational background, you said that after going to university, you had a culture shock. Can we talk about that culture shock?
Yeah. I think it was more an identity shock rather than so much a cultural shock, because even when we lived in the UK, I mean, I was very small,
right.
And we would be watching shows that I guess British children would be watching, I don't know, Teletubbies or whatever it was, Nickelodeon at the time, and not necessarily sort of very Muslim or Mauritian ones. So in that sense, I don't think I felt it as a child that I was different, and I had friends who were Muslims but from other heritages,
right.
Pakistani, Bangladeshi or Indian.
Mm-hmm.
But I think at university, coming from Mauritius, I felt like an outsider for many reasons, and a lot of it was to do with the fact that I joined university not as a home student but as an international student.
Right.
And that was due to sort of tax purposes and reasons at the time. Even though I am British and was born in the country,
right,
I hadn't lived in the country prior to starting university, and therefore was considered an international student, paying the higher fee, not being eligible for the student loan or government subsidies.
Right.
So I felt in this very weird position where I am from the UK, and
right.
my university colleagues could hear that from my accent or whatever. But I'm an international student, so I'm put in these, orientation weeks and boxes. I'm from Mauritius, but born here, and you've come back to a country where suddenly it feels so different, even
right.
if you were born and you're supposed to be back in your birthplace. So
right.
I think it's sort of, and you're also a young adult and living away from home, for the first time. So I think it was all of this melting pot of issues that brought this identity crisis, if you like.
Okay. So let's talk a bit about your educational background. Mm-hmm. How did you pursue academia, and how did you prepare your career for it?
Yeah, so in the way that you asked this question, it sounds like I planned to go down that route. Right. This was not planned at all. Right. I stumbled upon academia mainly as other things didn't work out and academia became an option. So right. to sort of briefly mention, I was always interested in science from school, right. particularly biology. And mm-hmm. this isn't to do any discrimination to physics or chemistry or math. I just was very drawn to biology. And I think it's the fascination that biology labs have with the skeletons, the plastic organs, the strange creatures in the jars preserved, the microscopes. I always found that very interesting, mm-hmm. and particularly the human body. So for me, it was medicine that was an obvious choice. And I also felt like I wanted to help people. And that was the only option that I knew that science involved. So medical school was what I applied for. Right. And through circumstance, and this is something I still don't understand, but we trust in Allah's plan, I didn't get into medical school right. In multiple stages. So as an undergrad, as a postgrad, etc. And instead of medicine, I ended up doing biomedical sciences, right. which this was really a technical thing. Again, it wasn't intentional. But at the time, and I think it's still the case, in your UCAS form, you can't put all the choices medicine in case you don't get into medical school. And right. that would mean not going to university that year. So you need to have sort of a backup option. Right. And biomed is, I think, still a very common backup option for right. people who want to go into medicine, because if you have a biomedical sciences degree for 3 years, you can then fast track into medical school, do the postgrad degree where it's 4 instead of 5 years. So that was my plan at the time. But again, doing biomed, I finished and graduated with the grades, but again, didn't get into medical school. And at the time that I was doing my final year, we had a final year research project that was part of the BSc degree. And that was really when I discovered how fun and interesting lab work really was.
Right.
And that was where sort of my inclination more towards the research and academia side of things than the clinical medicine side of things was really born. And I think, again, after failing to get into medical school after my biomedical undergrad, I thought, right, maybe this medicine thing isn't for me. I was going to interviews and I could find people with PhDs. And so I thought, okay, well, let's give that route a chance.
Right.
I was clearly very deluded at the time because that's just a lot of work to do, although some people do it. But that led me down to the route of doing research. So I did a master's by research and just fell in love with research at the time. I just thought it was so interesting. I loved doing the lab work. And I think what helped was, alhamdulillah, I was fairly good at it and successful in the lab. And so it spurred me on. And then it became a no-brainer. I thought I wanted to have my own lab and lead research and teach research to university students. And the route to doing that was to do a PhD. And so then it became the next step and the next thing that I did. So that's how I really ended up on the academic route.
Have any of your teachers or professors had made an impact on you, or have they supported you throughout that process to become an academic?
Yes, it would be unfair to say no, especially my undergraduate lecturers, because so I went to an undergraduate university that at the time was fairly new and pretty unknown, University of Bedfordshire. I think now it's on all prospectuses. But we were one of the first few cohorts on that biomed science course. There were 50 students in our class. And nowadays there are hundreds of students.
Right.
So it was a very intimate relationship that we had with our lecturers. And alhamdulillah, I had fantastic lecturers, really fantastic lecturers. And one lady, actually, she is Pakistani heritage, and she herself had her own research lab and was lecturing. And I think unknowingly at the time, but when I look back, she was definitely a big inspiration for me, and really in showing that this is possible even as a Muslim. And she had a scarf on her head most times, and they were always very supportive of whatever path that I took, particularly the research path, and the academic route, which was the one they took. So yes, I was supported. And even when I joined the academic research lab, when I did my PhD, which was not at the same university, I then transferred to University of Manchester.
Right.
My supervisors were very supportive of the type of research I wanted to do, but also how I led things in the lab. So yes, I will say people were supportive.
Yeah, I can say that it's definitely different from how you're explaining the university life. So when I was in uni, we would have a lecture with 300 plus students. You would have to make an effort to leave an impact on your lecturer.
Right.
So you would have to actually put your hand up and then 300 eyes on you.
Yes.
Or at the end of the lecture, you would have to go down those stairs.
Right.
Make an effort, go to the wait in line, because a couple of people will be waiting there to meet them. And then you would have to say, hey, I'm interested, let's have some office time, this and that. And if they see you're genuinely interested, that's when they're like, okay, here's some help.
Yep.
They wouldn't actively say, hey, I like how you look, or you look similar to me, let me help you out. No, because everybody pretty much has their own cliques, right?
Yes.
In university these days.
That's right.
They're small subgroups within a whole student body.
Yeah.
And then you wouldn't see people interacting with one another, because you would have the international students with international students.
Yeah.
You had let's say I went to Queen Mary, so we would have the East London boys with the East London boys, and the East London girls with the East London girls.
Yeah.
They would have their own small cliques, and I can imagine you had small classes. You said 30 people, right?
We were 50. But I wanted to pick up on something that you mentioned. So it wasn't the street wasn't a two-way, in the sense that it was the lecturer that had come to me and think, oh, we look alike and therefore I should encourage you. I was always proactive really in seeking that out. But from my perspective, I thought it was very nice to have this lady, be first of all a woman and be lecturing. And she was a very good lecturer, mashallah. I actually didn't do that many classes with her than I did with some of the others, but the ones that I did was already enough to spur that sort of relationship. And I think I was a pain of a student in uni, because I would go to their offices and knock on the door and be like, do you have time for a coffee or a chat? And how did you... This was a question I think I asked lecturers professors throughout the time that I was at uni, whether it was an undergrad or a postgrad or a PhD student, or afterwards a postdoc when I was training, it was just this thirst for knowing what was your route, a bit like what we're doing here. What was your journey into X? And just to see the variety of paths that people took. So yes, I can relate to some of these cliques, which is also why I was saying at the beginning, I wasn't sure where I belonged, because I'm a Hope student, but then I'm also international, but then I don't look like them and I'm brown. And it was all a little bit confusing, which I think it still is at university. But that smaller group of 50 did still help, make things more navigatable than hundreds and hundreds of students.
How about at home? Did you get that support that you needed from your parents or your siblings, or what about from the community?
Yeah, so my parents, alhamdulillah, they've always supported my siblings and I on whatever career path we decided to choose, even if it's a career path they have absolutely no idea of. So my parents, neither of them are scientists, nor are they're not in STEM at all. They're in accounting, the both of them. And I think it still is my father's dream that one of his children is going to go down the route of accounting and become an accountant. And with all due respects to accountants, I just didn't think it was for me, even if I did try it out at school. So they were never discouraging me towards going down the science route. They were very cautious though. And I think that came from a place of being a parent and wanting to protect your child against something that maybe you don't know, but also you don't see a lot of Muslim people doing. So it's a bit like this fear of the unknown. But alhamdulillah, they were very supportive. The rest of the community, I think, I'm sort of known as the one that we have no idea what she does. It sounds cool. It involves being in a lab, but what the purpose of it is, and what, I get asked these sort of medical type questions because a lot of people think I'm a medical doctor, and it's like, oh, what do you think of this drug versus this drug that my doctor has given me for my arthritis? And I'm like, I think you should do what your doctor has asked you to do. I just
hurt my elbow the other day. Should I take an ibuprofen?
I don't know. Just I guess. But no, I mean, alhamdulillah, the most important thing to me was the parents, and they were very supportive throughout, even if sometimes they couldn't understand what was going on.
So can you tell us a bit about being an editor for Nature Cell Biology?
Yeah, I wanted to say, to start with, Nature Cell Biology is, as you know, a science journal and one of the most eminent high-impact science cell biology journals in the world. This was my dream job. I say was because it was a dream. It no longer is. Alhamdulillah, it's now reality. Alhamdulillah. So when I was going through PhD, etc., and decided to transition out of doing active research into now research publishing, I always looked up to that journal because I did a PhD in cell biology, and the journal's publications would be my go-to for the latest in the field and in the broader cell biology field. And so when I decided to become an editor or explore the career path, I thought it would be so interesting and cool to work for Nature Cell Biology. But I think you asked about the role. So what we do a little bit about the day-to-day, essentially the editor, the science editor, decides what to publish in the field of cell biology, what are the hot topics, what are the trends, and if we're interested in a paper, I would then take the manuscript through the whole process through to its publication. And that process briefly involves, it's a process of peer review. And that's pretty much how science research, pretty much in all STEM fields, work out. So a researcher in a lab would be submitting their work to a journal, and it's scientists like themselves or their peers that would review the work. Its soundness, if it makes sense, how to improve it, if there are certain things that might have been overinterpreted based on the data, etc. So review the work and then submit that back to the journal, and the editor would then moderate between the authors and the reviewers to get the work out to publication. So this is really sort of the bulk of what I do, is coordinating this whole peer review process, sending it to the authors and back to the reviewers, because this is the relationship between them is anonymous, so they don't know who has reviewed their work. And likewise, it can be blinded as to which author submitted it. And then just tunneling the paper through to seeing the light of day, which is publication. And really, science publishing is so important because there is so much research that can sit in the drawers or on computers in the labs around the world, but it's the only way it gets out to the the entire world and for people to access it is through publication. So this is the role of the editor. It coordinates that storytelling process and transitioning the research story from the lab in somewhere in the world through to the entire world and the access to the entire world.
Have you yourself written any papers?
Yes, alhamdulillah. So it's sort of part of everyone's PhD really to publish.
Right.
Because ideally, what is a PhD? It is to produce, that's the ultimate goal at the end of it, an original piece of research that contributes to the body of knowledge that was not known before. And alhamdulillah, I was able to do that. It was a small piece of knowledge, but I was able to publish my work, yes.
So I'm assuming someone somewhere has cited you in their paper.
Yes,
or their
alhamdulillah.
Has anybody come into contact with you about your paper at all? Or students?
Yes, like the work that I did during my PhD, people have reached out. And it was so funny because I was at a conference once in my capacity as an editor, and one of the students came up simply by virtue of my name and said, "Oh, I'm researching this protein," because I was researching a very obscure protein that nobody knew of at the time, and the field therefore is very small, and so they came up and thought, "Oh, I read your paper and I thought it was so interesting, and I'm looking at this aspect of the protein." It was a mind-blowing moment for me because I just didn't think anybody cared about this protein, but clearly I was wrong.
Oh wow, that's quite interesting. So you've been on TEDx,
yes,
right? And you're an advocate, especially for women, to support women and empower them to work in STEM subjects. How do you think we can encourage more women? And let's say, because we're a Muslim channel, specifically Muslim women, how can we empower them to get into STEM subjects, study them, and become an academic like you?
I mean, the answer to this question sort of forms the foundation of the advocacy work that I do, and inshallah plan to do much more of. I think there's a general issue in STEM, and this is not unknown, I think, even to people who are not in STEM, that there aren't enough women.
Right.
And even fewer women from diverse backgrounds, and even fewer Muslim women in STEM. And that was the premise of my TEDx talk as well. And what can we do to address this problem? I think one of the reasons, it's actually a multifaceted problem with no simple and clear solution. I think there are many things that we need to do. But if we pick the Muslim women, for example, as a case study, let's say, and this will be applicable to other ethnic minority groups, I think one of the main reasons, and I felt this actually at the time without really being able to put my finger on that feeling, when we see people who look like us remotely in a certain field, somewhere in our subconscious, it creates a sense of belonging to that field, or it gives us, at least initially, the idea of, I could belong there if I wanted to, because there are people like me doing that kind of thing. And so role modeling, mentoring, I think these are two key aspects that are not enough paid attention to in the STEM field. And I can speak from my own experience. Although I had good mentors, they were not formal mentors. They were more because I was a painful student, and I would go into the office and be, "Hi, what did you do? Do you have 15 minutes? If you didn't, I would find a question to ask that was science related and then turn the conversation." But it didn't need to be that way. If we had a formal mentoring scheme where there was the space and time and dedicated framework for the student to ask these questions. And it's because research is very go, and there's never enough time, too much to do. Funding is always slim. But I think we're losing the essence of, and through that, excluding people. So I do think increasing role models that are present in STEM and having diverse people be at the forefront of STEM careers, but also, and so Muslim women, if we see a Muslim woman, then, we can see, oh, this is a career that I can have. And having formal mentoring schemes, I think, and this should start in high school, quite early on in the curriculum, where students become, even if it isn't to ultimately do a STEM subject, but at least get people inspired or interested in science. Because I feel like there is prejudice sometimes in our school systems. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but where people would think, oh, science, math, physics, that kind of thing is for boys, and girls would be more, oriented towards the arts or literature. I really dislike this. I mean, I felt a little bit the same when I was in high school. And the example that I can give is there was a point in time where my male counterparts were studying, I think it was called technical design or something like that. And they had these cool rulers, and that would be the basis for going on to do architecture.
Right.
Whereas girls, we didn't even have the option in the school that I was in. It was either you cook or you sew. And those are fascinating pursuits that I think we should all know of. But already it's a form of excluding
Right.
girls, young girls, into these subjects that could lead into STEM careers.
Right.
So I think we have to look at our curriculums, increase role modeling, have people come and talk into schools, have mentoring programs, partnerships between STEM subjects and schools, and then mentoring. Mentoring is a really important one.
Yeah, the issue, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of it is institutionalized, a lot of it. So you have barriers in place, like, for example, the glass ceiling.
Yeah.
Right. That's just one example. Or just like internalized cliques in organizations, like the Old Boys Network. So if you don't know what that is, it's basically older men grooming the younger men and male generation to basically be very similar to them. And then by doing so, they would just separate the women from these networks because they are not comfortable with them because in these situations, they're either doing activities like, drinking or doing golf or just enjoying amongst themselves and excluding the rest, which means that it limits opportunities to other people.
That's right.
So a lot of it is institutionalized. And of course, there are policies, there are laws in place to prevent it, but it's very hard to enforce it, especially in organizations that have it already established in there from the CEO.
Yeah.
It's not easy at all.
Correct. 100%.
So when it comes to giving advice to young women who are aspiring to enter science, how can they navigate the challenges and make meaningful contributions to a scientific community?
So what I would say is for young girls who are interested in the fields of science or STEM in general, don't let yourself be a barrier to getting into the role. Pursue it anyway. And it is possible to have a science career, to have a career in STEM without compromising on Islamic values. And that was something that was a barrier for me. It was actually a barrier that stemmed from ignorance, really.
Right.
That you can't be a Muslim and do research in a lab. What will you be working on? Cloning was coming up at the time, etc.
Right.
I digress. But for young girls, it's pursue it. If you are good at it, you enjoy it, pursue it. Get the training that you need. Learn as much as possible from the people that will be in your environment. Be excellent, really, in your pursuit of the science, and then contribute in a way that is meaningful to you, whether that is through the research that you output, that is through teaching. Ultimately, for people who go down the teaching route, which is a very, very important and very hard job, being academic lecturers, or through policy and changing. We need more diverse people on policy boards for this sort of thing, where we can then impact the next generation. And all sorts of ethical issues that exist in science, they need diverse voices. I mean, climate change, for example, with the smaller islands, and we don't hear the voices from these people who are firsthand experiencing the climate change problems that people in the West are researching or drawing out the policies for. We need everybody on board, and that's how we're going to be able to fight these. And climate change is one problem. Poverty, food insecurity, wars, all of these are issues that I believe to some extent have solutions within STEM. So I would say the first step is persevere down that route. They're not easy routes. I don't think any route is. And there are challenges, but embrace the challenge, see them as learning opportunities, and seek help from people. Even if they close the door, even if it's a person that you can't relate to that doesn't look like you, don't use that as a barrier. Build bridges and try and get ahead in your career in whatever way.
Yeah, I would say, definitely, because you would have like lecturers. Like there was one time where I was in a lecture and my lecturer was an atheist, right?
Okay.
And he used the term that we believed in mythologies instead of religion. And I remember everyone in the room felt a little was silent, like, okay, he used mythology, even though it's a belief system, right? We actually believe in what we believe in, the book and the Prophet Muhammad, right? Or if you're Christian, you believe in the Bible, right? And even though he said that, I was the only one that went to his office and pursued it. And then at one point, that lecturer and another lecturer that was also doing the same thing to, right? They just met at one point. It's like, oh, I know him.
Right.
Yeah, we were walking from, I think, we had this green building in Queen Mary to the central building in the Bancroft building. And we were just walking and talking. He's like, yeah, he's a good student. And then that's how you just make an impact, just converse with them, even though they might have conflicting beliefs and values. It's definitely beneficial to at least broaden their understanding of you.
Absolutely.
Rather than just closing their belief, being stuck in their barriers and belief systems.
I think that's such a beautiful example, by the way, and that's a way that someone can stand out. And I think that's also how you trailblaze, when you go against the grain, or you leave the beaten track and you go off onto a track, even if nobody's done it before you, or they're so far ahead that they're out of sight. And I love the example you shared, because your professor's beliefs didn't have to impact yours. And I think we need to be strong and confident in our own iman and faith and belief system, not to be, influenced or think that could be influenced. Because, for example, when I was in science as well, one thing that my parents were worried about was, wait, what is this research? And I know that there are many communities who still, and it's out of ignorance, it's our duty as people in science and STEM to educate and do this outreach, right? But people thinking, this is all wrong. How can we be doing research on something that God created? And it's like we're questioning what God has done. Not really, and we're questioning it maybe, but to better understand it. And I always found the research to bring me closer to the Creator, because I would observe cells under the microscope, watch things grow, and these are miracles. Yeah. And we say subhanallah when we see these sorts of things, rather than taking you away from the religion. So I love what you said in terms of finding the common ground with the person who they won't have the same beliefs, because that is part of the problem. There aren't a lot of Muslims in certain fields, but seeing what is it that I can get from that person that will benefit me, and you take the good and leave what perhaps doesn't quite fit in with your belief systems.
Definitely. I would say that Islam is one of the religions that encourages you to think and find the answer.
Right.
Like the most recent fatwa I was reading was about how would a Muslim in space pray. And I think it was a collaboration between Malaysians and Indonesians. And the fatwa just literally, of course, it's a modern day question or problem that a very specific certain one or two people in this world might have, but they would need that answer, right? Yeah. And the answer was just pray towards the earth. That was the majority, or the main understanding, or the main belief, the main what's it called, answer, guidance that the fatwa gave, that just pray towards the earth. Okay. The earth rotates. There's no way you can directly pray towards Makkah, right? So definitely modern day questions and answers can still be found by us, as long as we pursue that goal towards finding that question, right? I agree. That answer to that question. So I believe that, look, Islam, a lot of belief systems, like, you've attained nirvana or enlightenment, right? And it's outside of this world, but you can there is a way of finding success in this world, right? Yeah. And everything that you do, the knowledge you find, the acts you do, the way you talk, the way you walk, is an act of worship. That's right. So I believe, it's amazing that Islam can encourage such enlightenment, because we had the golden age of Islam at one point, right? Right. And why not continue it? Why not pursue that golden age? Why not make another golden age? Totally. And we can do that. We're in the position to do that. Yep. You're also in the position to do that. The new age golden age. The new golden age. So can you tell us a bit more about your past research in cell biology? What are some of the most exciting developments on the field and that you're passionate about? I mean, I love talking about my past research, and it's so unfortunate to say past, but I was looking specifically at the process of cell division. Right. So we all start off life as a single cell, and viewers might know a cell is the basic unit of life.
and how do we go from a cell to an embryo to a fetus to a baby to a human being is through the process of division. It's kind of counterintuitive. The cell divides to multiply.
Right.
The process is called division, but it's actually multiplying. And
Right.
so that was the process that I was studying throughout my PhD and my postdoctoral research. I went more in depth into the process. And I was really looking at the fundamental mechanisms. And I've spent hundreds of hours and hours looking at cells undergo division under the microscope. So we would stain the cells with a dye so you could
Right.
see them under fluorescence and watch them divide. And really I was looking at the fundamental processes that are in place that help the cell divide in order to better understand what's going wrong when the cell divides abnormally.
Right.
And as we know, what happens when a cell divides abnormally and in an uncontrolled fashion, because the division is actually a highly coordinated and orchestrated process, subhanAllah. But if that goes off track, this can lead to cancer, which is a big ill, has been a big ill of modern times. So ultimately, the goal was to try and understand how we could therapeutically target certain proteins or genes to try and get at certain cancers. So that's a little bit about what I was doing, is really understanding what we call fundamental research, which is the basics of how something works, to then use that to apply translationally or to the clinic. So that was a little bit what I was doing. What was the second part of your question?
It was, so there's emerging technologies, right? So what are you particularly interested in the scientific field, like innovations, or are you looking forward to new research, anything like that?
Yes. Well, as an editor now, so when you do a PhD, it's very focused and it's very niche, and obviously cell biology is itself a niche within biology, but then within that you're studying something very specific,
right?
A process, and I was studying a protein, so a component of that process. But now, as my role as an editor, and was one of the reasons I was drawn to the science publishing field, I get to be exposed to the entire breadth of cell biology, from organism biology to development, cell division, cancer, RNA, vaccines, etc. And there are so many exciting developments, but I think one thing that fascinates me is genome engineering, and this is going to be controversial,
right.
but for the purpose of treating untreatable, or at least so far untreatable, genetic disease.
Right.
This idea that we can deliver small molecules packaged into little bubbles, if you like, vesicles, that go into the human body of diseased patients and can actually correct abnormalities in certain genes, for example, those that lead to certain blood disorders, thalassemia or red blood cell disorders, correct it at the genetic level so that the human is completely cured of it through the technology that I think everybody has heard of now, CRISPR engineering. And so the frontiers of CRISPR, the researchers have been pushing these frontiers. So I find this research truly fascinating.
Right.
I don't know if I can tell you a second area that I find equally fascinating, but it's embryology research. Okay. And the UK is really a pioneer in this type of research, where we have embryos in the form of organoids. So organoids are not actual embryos. They are derived from stem cells.
Right.
So the ethical concerns are a bit less in that sense, because obviously we have to always bear in mind the ethics for both of these fields.
Right.
And using these to better understand the very early developmental process, even those that impact humans, in order to better understand, pregnancy loss or just the diseases that could arise in these very early stages, which have been thus far extremely difficult to study, for the very simple reason that if you would need to recreate in vitro sort of the process of fertilization, etc. So I think these areas are very cool.
And stem cells have been used to help paralysis, right? There has been I have seen like a few videos and stuff like that where stem cells have been used in situations to help people walk or get some nerve, help their nerve endings, and then stop moving their fingers, arms, where they were completely immobile. Yeah. So it's quite interesting that us human beings can find ways to, for hundreds of years, thousands of years since the dawn of time, right? Yeah. Like we've been stuck. Certain people have been stuck in that situation. Yeah. Now we're finding ways to overcome it.
I agree.
And just to move on, you have been in a few leadership roles, right? Mm-hmm. how has your experience been being a leader? Have you been a mentor to anybody? Have you imparted any experience, knowledge to the newer generation?
Yes, I do aspire to further leadership roles, I will say. Sometimes when you change careers, you sort of go back down to the sort of bottom ladder. But I do believe we all can be a leader in our own right, regardless of sort of the rank of role one has.
Right.
But I was very fortunate when I was a PhD student. After you are a budding student and you sort of grow into more mature, because it's a 4-year degree, I had the opportunity of mentoring many undergraduate students who would come into the lab that I was working in to do their undergrad projects, but also master's students. And alhamdulillah, I was able to have brilliant students under my wing. People that didn't need mentors, I think, but they were really just incredible. Mostly men, I would say, but they were incredible students, and imparting the basics of how to behave in a lab to the actual techniques themselves and how to perform them properly. I found myself repeating what I was taught when I joined the labs or other labs that I may have been in before to the students. And I feel like being in that position was such a privilege, because it's like when you're a child and you're teaching them, I don't know, manners or behaving properly. That happens at a very early stage, and the earlier it happens, sort of the better it is when they grow up, or the less difficult it is to impart certain values. It's the same thing in the lab, even if age-wise it doesn't really make a difference. But the earlier people learn how to do science, and it isn't just about coming into the lab and playing with the tools. It's how do you design an experiment? What do you have to think about? What controls do you put in? How do you interpret the data that you get out? And alhamdulillah, I had the opportunity of doing this with a lot of students that nowadays we have contacts on LinkedIn or whatever, and they're posting their updates of papers they've published or conferences they've attended, or now themselves have become mentors. It's so beautiful to see. And sometimes they write back to say, you taught me how to do this. And just the other day, I was showing this to one of my own students, and I'm just thinking, wow, firstly, I feel old. Secondly, I just think that's incredible. So alhamdulillah, also when I was a postdoc, I had even more of that responsibility, because postdoc is what you do after you do a PhD.
Right.
And now you're a more senior member of the lab.
Right.
And all the students would come to me. It's sometimes overwhelming, but they were lovely students. And just being able to give out that guidance or advice on a piece of a technical problem or even a writing concern was brilliant.
So you've held a lot of hats. Now, I like to ask this question to a lot of I guess, how do you manage a work-life balance? Like you're an editor, you're also a researcher at a certain point in time, and then you have to manage family life as well. Yeah. What would you say to a person that says, I don't have time to do what I want to do, right? And to pursue goals or to pursue academia? What advice would you give them?
Yeah. First of all, hands up, this is an ongoing work in progress. Time management and prioritization is something that I actually find fascinating on the side to learn more about. So many videos out there and people that have built very successful businesses on. So that's one idea. So what works for you. And it's also quite a field where there's not one size fits all. It's what works for you. But I think the advice that not really advice, the strategy that I use is I put some rules in place and some non-negotiables of what needs to be done or what I try not to do in order to try and make other things happen. So one thing for me, for example, with the role of the editor, it's a prime job for time management and prioritization, because the manuscripts are coming from all over the world at any time of the day, at any day of the week, any time of the year. So if I wanted, I could work every single day of the week, every working hour of a day, and there would still be more work. Right. So that brings a bit of a time management challenge into place. So I have a very strict rule. I do not work at the weekends. My day job, as in, I do not do any work at the weekends, and that is very strict. I make sure that at weekends I speak to my parents, spend time with family, and I try and dedicate time, sort of use time blocking strategies to work on personal goals or do some of the advocacy stuff or training for speaking, etc. So I would say, we say we don't have time, right? But it's sometimes in these small pockets of time that seem innocuous, whether it's 5 minutes over lunch or 10-minute commute, just listen to part of a podcast. It can really spark ideas for innovation, and that takes us to the next step. So I would say think small steps when it comes to setting and achieving goals rather than sort of big sweeping changes, and how that can better incorporate into the day.
Then when it comes to women working in STEM subjects, what challenges do you think they will face if once they enter that area, that academia, or in pursuit of a degree or master's or PhD?
Yeah, so I think at degree level, and I have spoken to students actually as part of my advocacy work to better understand today's challenges compared to when I was at university. And it's interesting how things have gotten better, but the challenges are still the same, where some Muslim women have mentioned when they're doing group projects, for example, these were engineering students, they don't feel like their voice is being heard because there are a lot of men on the course, or
Right.
because they're a Muslim woman wearing a headscarf, people think they don't have good ideas. So being heard, I think, can probably be an issue, especially if how you look plays into that unconscious bias or judgment.
Right.
When people enter the workplace, as you mentioned earlier, these structural, institutional inequities that are already in place and still in place, women are going to face that. I have faced it, continue to face it actually, in the role that I'm currently in, even if, and I think it's about being aware, and hence why I think mentoring, having one person who's been one step ahead tell you these things, because it's so funny, right? I faced these issues my entire training through science,
Right.
yet came into publishing, and it's not that I expected not to face the issues, but I was still surprised when I did face them. So I think it's like it's just, it permeates through your work life as well. So I think it's knowing them and then knowing how you can advocate for yourself and address them. And I think from women, especially our Muslim women, it's learning self-advocacy, finding your voice and trusting it, right? Because a lot of people can cower when people are not listening to their ideas or voices, and also building community and networks where you can come together, because women are far and few between in STEM fields, and then support one another.
So I would say that, I grew up at a time where, Muslims were under the magnifying glass more than they are today. And I'm sure all the brothers here can also agree with it. Like, we used to go to a madrasa. We used to study there as well. So our clothing would be something like this, basically a white tobe with like a white skull cap. And when we used to sit on a train or bus, I promise you there would always be one seat empty on each side. Because nobody would want to sit there. And I'm sure everybody will agree with that. Like, we had those situations where we were where we were going to class trips, right? And there's like a good 30 of us in a train, right? And the entire you wouldn't see anybody sitting in the same section as us. It is interesting how you might not think that somebody might not like you, right? But once you see it like happening in front of your face, it does make it clear that it's there, it exists, and we need to find a way to stop it from happening. At least have a conversation. What we try to do is just have an initial conversation. Give a good first impression with people, as long as they can see that you're positive, right? You have something good to share, you're good mannered, whether or not you're Muslim, it doesn't matter, right? They can see through that, and once you make a good impact, of course they'll start to change their perspective or perception of you. And that's the main thing that we believe in, just changing the perspective of the other person, or making them have a positive outlook on you as a person. Of course, there are ignorant people out there. No matter what you do or how you interact with them, they'll be ignorant. They wouldn't want to listen. They wouldn't even want to speak to you. If they want to speak to you, they just want to shout. That's it. And what I say to that is just walk away. The biggest impact you can do is just walk away and leave them to their own thoughts and their own opinions. And I just wish we lived in a utopia where everybody just accepted one another. But hopefully one day it will come. Inshallah.
I think, like you say, just this idea of, and this is also relevant in the workplace, as Muslims, and I definitely say this as a visibly Muslim woman, we have that expectation placed upon us that is, people often say, is higher than maybe other women or other people. And it's like your behavior is always going to be looked at, but the way you respond to certain things, and just always that standards always have to strive for higher. And also the other responsibility that I personally feel is whatever, I would say or do, it's also in the eyes of people who are not from the Muslim community, because I don't like to use the word other. It can reflect on how they will then perceive the entirety of the Muslim women community. You know what I mean? It's almost like we're reflecting and we're always representing one another when we go about in the community. Right. And I think, like you say, that positive impression, the idea that we have so much more in common, even if our beliefs might be different, the way we dress, the way we look are different, there is more that unites us than there is that divides us. Definitely. And it's what we choose to focus on and what we choose to see.
Yeah, we're all human beings at the end of the day.
Right. That's right. Facing similar problems.
Yeah, definitely. We same red blood runs through the
right. The biology is the same.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. And let's go back to your career. Do you have a next phase in your career or a career goal you want to achieve?
Yeah. So I would love to progress further as an editor. I'm still on the sort of first rank of it, and I would love to go into higher ranks and more leadership positions, like you say, become manager, where I can exert more leadership and manage people, and really find myself in positions where I can make a difference, specifically with regards to the Muslim community.
Right.
And one of the initiatives, alhamdulillah, I was able to start last November in my workplace is a Muslims employee network.
All right.
I mean, these things are not new. They exist in many other companies. We didn't have one in the company that I'm working in publishing. And I think this network has a lot of potential for Muslims working in the company and in general,
right,
as in Muslim networks in companies. It's opportunity to bring people together to advocate for our rights within the workplace, but also to support and uplift one another and move into more senior positions. Because another thing, which is, I guess, another type of maybe the same problem, sometimes the higher up we go, we see the fewer Muslims or the fewer diverse people. Yeah. And this became very apparent when I set up this network, because we needed a network sponsor,
right,
who was someone who's part of what they call senior leadership team.
Right.
And nobody in that leadership team is a practicing Muslim. So we had initially nobody as a sponsor, and then, we were open to having someone who isn't a practicing Muslim as a sponsor.
Right.
Only needed to be someone who was interested in advocating for the network and
right,
in sort of those higher tables. And we have a gentleman on board who's Christian with Turkish heritage, which was kind of the slimmest link we could, find with
right,
Muslim. And I thought that's perfect. He was interested in a learning opportunity and saw it as a learning opportunity, personal development opportunity. And for us, it was great to have a sponsor because he's a fabulous communicator.
Right.
But beyond that as well, at least from my perspective, it's an opportunity for us as Muslims in the network to build bridges with people who are not from the Muslim community, and hopefully by the events that we organize, also change people's perception, like you were saying, and make the workplace more welcoming, but also more conducive to having Muslims progress onto these higher roles. So I do hope that I can progress within my own career into these higher roles and try and overcome whatever structural barriers are there. And one of the steps is hopefully trying to build this network.
So I think it's true, like, when people do progress through the ladder of career ladder, right, they tend to forget that with their roots, because they're too focused on themselves, right? And look, we're all guilty of it. We want to achieve that next position, that next pay rise, but we can't forget that there are also people there trying to climb the first step of that ladder, and they can't reach it.
That's right.
And you just need to give that helping hand, pick them up.
Yeah.
And definitely, they will have an impact. It's a chain reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever we do, whatever benefit we do, and especially to the community, because, there are people are progressing, leaving their communities because, they're looking at it, especially in the East London at the time, right? You see, it's not great. Crime is high, right?
Yeah.
And they just want to avoid it rather than do something to fix the issue, right? Homelessness is on the rise. And it's something that we find very it's very important to us, because we've done homeless drives, even especially at the time of when it was COVID, right? It looked like the council just gave up on them. So at such a crucial time, the organization at the time and the members at the time, they banded together and they started an initiative to help these homeless people. We gave food packages, we gave PPE, we gave documents to help them find homeless shelters in their area, and it just felt like, how can us, an organization that is just a fledgling organization, do something that a government or a council isn't even bothering with? They have the money, they have the manpower for it. Why not help the downtrodden person who's literally stuck? It's a bit discouraging, but at least they know somebody cares. At least they have a positive, because a lot of these people are veterans, right? And they felt like they've been discarded by society. So just having, even one time, one of the brothers in this room, the CEO Amino, they had a conversation with him, and he hadn't had a conversation with another human being. He was sitting next to a church as well. So imagine, he's a Christian himself, and we were the first people that actually he had more impact from the conversation that we had than anything else, than the food that we gave him, than the support that we were trying to give to him. And it's just that, I encourage whoever's watching this, just give a helping hand. It does make an impact. It does definitely make an impact.
I agree, and that's so beautiful, and mashallah for the work. May Allah bring it back to you in much barakah. But I think what you highlight as well is, it's a bit grim, but I see it as an increasing problem of our time, something that is only going to get compounded if we don't all sort of come to a certain realization.
Right.
Because we're living in a world that's moving more and more towards individualism and the pursuit of kind of the self. And without wanting to make that sound like that's an awful thing, we should all pursue our goals. But I do think there's a sense of responsibility when you're in a privileged position. And there's this word privilege, right? It's thrown about a lot, and it has a relative meaning, right? If you have, in this case, a roof above your head, family, people, friends that you can talk to, you are in a privileged position relative to this homeless person who doesn't have a roof above their head and hasn't had somebody to talk to for God knows how long.
Right.
It is our moral duty, right, to lend a helping hand, and whatever that may look like. In you guys' case, it was really beautiful. It was an extensive effort, but sometimes it's simply smiling, right? Our Prophet said, "Smiling itself is a charity."
Exactly.
And that can have an impact on a person. So I agree with what you said.
And let's start having a little imaginary situation. If we were in a utopia where you were given the funding and the research and the manpower necessary, what one disease would you want to cure?
Gosh, that's such a difficult question, isn't it? I would say diseases of the mind, because, and that doesn't even include cancer or HIV or diabetes or heart disease. I think disease of the mind, it all begins with the mind. And mental health is now a theme. Luckily, in our communities as well, it's becoming more accepted.
Right.
If we could just eradicate diseases of the mind, I feel like the other diseases that affect the body would, whether it is the diabetes, the cancer, and all of the others, things would fall into place. I'm not saying they would go away, but they would fall into place. But I think more research focused onto that, and having healthier mindsets and mind holistically, right? The brain in itself as an organ in terms of its wiring, but also from a spiritual perspective, a mental health perspective. I think if we could treat diseases of the mind, we would prevent or slow the onset of many of the other diseases of the rest of the body, because we're very much controlled by the mind.
Definitely.
And you said earlier about the concepts that I find interesting. There's this concept of neuroplasticity, and I'm by no means an expert to talk about this, but this idea that you can rewire the connections in your brain to think a certain way, and it's what we call mindset and how we can approach. I find that incredible. And I feel like if we had a way of doing that sort of all of them for all of any diseases like these neurodegenerative Alzheimer's and all the lot that we get as we're aging, and we are an increasingly aging population, lifespan is increasing. I think if we could do away with diseases of the mind, it would, I think we'd live in a better world.
Recently, I've been reading a book on anxiety. It's by, it was called Dare. It's by, I forgot his first name, but his name is McDowell. And he took an approach called the Dare approach, where you tackle anxiety by making it more comfortable. So how you do it is, instead of using it as because apparently the way you react to anxiety is more of you can either take it as a fight or flight response, or you can take it as redirect it into positive energy. So how you do that is just questioning it or taking a positive approach to it, right? You accept it, you tackle it, and then you divert your mind to doing something that is more like proactive, like reading or something like that, and keep on using that process and recycling that process. And then it's like a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? And it was quite interesting. I'm still reading the book, but the first portion of it was just about the Dare approach and how he took it. And it's very interesting just reading it.
Interesting. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah,
Dare.
you should. It's Dare. There's also an app for it, but it's quite expensive, like £75. So it's like an audio book, and it just like gives you tidbits away to like micromanage your stress levels.
I see.
You know, it's quite interesting. Let's move on to the next part. How would you define success? Is it something in this world or something beyond this world?
We say both, right? Because we want to have everything. And why not, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, right, you can enjoy the dunya, but also not to forget the akhirah.
Exactly.
And I think, the standard response would be, of course, success in this world and success in the hereafter. I think success in the hereafter probably looks the same for all of us. I would imagine, entry into Jannah, the highest level, with family members and friends and all our prophets, peace be upon them, and roam freely and meeting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I think that would be success. That's ultimate success, let's say. And I think that helps us working backwards to define how we can achieve success and what it looks like in the dunya, right? I think thinking more about how we're doing and how that's contributing to our akhirah can be a way of defining success. And it's interesting you asked this question because recently I've been thinking about this in terms of, you also asked earlier, prioritization and time management and how to focus and what to focus one's energies on.
Right.
Oftentimes it's asking, how is this helping within this world? How is it helping our community? And ultimately, inshallah, it's helping in the akhirah as well in terms of the scales and weighing on the scales, but also the community. And I think within this life, for me personally, success is your well-being. Well-being is a big theme for me, because I feel like if you're not well physically, mentally, spiritually, then it doesn't matter how much money we have, who is around us, right? We're just not well. But also that sense of fulfillment. I use the word fulfillment, maybe it's something else, but that feeling that you've made a tangible difference or you've made an impact on one person's life. To me, that sort of gives this warm, fuzzy feeling that I like to call success. And I think I try and sort of spend some of the advocacy work that isn't sort of for me, it's for the next generation, for empowering our community and doing my bit towards giving back. So those kinds of activities to me are success. And I think our definition of success is evolving as we are evolving in our own lives. But that's how I view success.
Definitely. It is subjective. So it depends, it varies from people to people.
Yeah, there's no right or wrong, right?
There's no right or wrong.
We can't judge.
Definitely. So we're nearing the end of the podcast. Just wanted to say, do you have anything you want to discuss about, anything you want to highlight before we end it?
You asked quite comprehensive questions. I think we're good. I mean, if there's anything else that you wanted to ask, it's been such a joy.
How did you hear about us?
Oh, well, the honest answer is I heard about you through Ash. So through Ramadan Tent Project is how I know Ash.
Right.
And he mentioned your work. And I want to say it's just incredible work that you guys are doing, and that your CEO sent over the prospectus and also found the documentaries around Islamic history. I find it completely fascinating. And I must say I was a little nervous thinking of how the science background will be fitting into all of this.
Right.
But I mean, when we look at Islamic history and science, it's so intertwined and linked. And it was something that I was amazed after so many years learning. And I wish I'd learned this back at school. You know, there are Islamic great scholars that have contributed to science. So many names. Al-Khwarizmi, which is often known as the father of algebra. Ibn Sina, who wrote the first medical book that was used as the canon of medicine, that was used to teach medicine in like the 1600s. That's so mind-blowing. And yet we don't hear about these items. So I think it's fabulous that you're bringing into the fore Islamic history in general, because I feel like a lot of the answers to some of these new age or modern day problems can lie in our history and how we can apply them. So yes, short answer. And then I went off and found out a little bit more. I've watched some of the episodes of this podcast on YouTube. But like I said, I had not heard of you before, Ash.
Yeah, we recently actually, just to add on what you said, we recently actually went to an Islamic school. We actually did a project where we gave lectures on ambitious Muslims. And we did highlight female Muslims that made an impact in history. So, for example, Fatima al-Fihri, right? She established the first university in Morocco, right? So when the students heard that, I was like, what? Okay, first thing was, what, really? The first university was by Muslims? Okay, you don't learn that in school. No. And she was a woman? You know, they were gobsmacked.
Right.
And then we talked about modern, like, influential people. And we talked about the two brothers, the billionaires that own Asda, right?
Right.
Was the name Zuba and Muhsin Issa.
Right. And
they were like, Muslims own Asda? You know, they were gobsmacked.
Yeah.
And it's sad that, you know, they talk about Diversity Week and stuff like that, yet they don't talk about, you know, these successful people that are here alive, doing wonderful projects for Muslims and empowering the Muslim community. And it's just that if it was more well known, and we're trying to do that, you know, we're trying to do more projects like that to, you know, get the word out that, you know, we're here and we're here to make an impact, a positive impact.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you know, we're still trying.
Yeah.
And we'll definitely try and do more projects like this in the future. It was quite, you know, I've taught before, taught Islamic classes back in the days, and it was quite, you know, it reignited that spark of teaching classes, you know, and I was happy to do it. It was quite an experience.
But that's brilliant. And just to pick up on what you said earlier, to relate it back to the topic of STEM and increasing Muslim women or Muslim men and women in STEM, if we don't teach our students about the Islamic scholars or Muslim scholars in the past who made impacts in STEM, it makes us feel we don't belong in the field, right? And that's also part of the reason of it's not just visually not seeing someone in your family or, you know, who looks like you as a teacher, but also the role models or people that one can look at. Everybody knows about Albert Einstein and who Louis Pasteur, you know, fabulous scientists, not to take away from their work, but there are other Islamic figures who did incredible work, and we're just not taught this in the schools.
Exactly, and a lot of their work is derived from these scholars from the Muslim age, right? The golden age of Islam. And I just wish, you know, they just, you know, at least touched on it like, a little bit, but you know, beggars can't be choosers sometimes.
That's right.
You know?
That's
beggars
true.
Can't be choosers.
I think the conclusion of this podcast is really need to start this new golden age.
Yes, definitely. Inshallah, one day. So I would like to thank you for taking your time from your busy schedule to come to this podcast. I hope you've had a positive experience coming here.
It's been incredible. I haven't seen the time gone by, but Jazakallah khair, thank you so much for inviting me on your platform. It's been really a pleasure and honor. And I would like to thank the audience for watching this episode and supporting us. Please do like, share, and subscribe, and follow our guest to follow the amazing work that she's doing right now.
And I'm going to end this episode by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Assalamu alaikum.